Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Thursday, August 6th. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Dominica to Iceland. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. Dominica, that green and mountainous island between Guadeloupe and Martinique, has been quietly working through a question of constitutional balance. A man named Linton has won a constitutional challenge concerning the post of opposition leader in Dominica. The details of the court's reasoning aren't widely available yet, but the essence is this. The way the opposition leader was appointed had been called into question, and the court agreed that something in that process did not sit right with the Constitution. In a small parliamentary system, the role of opposition leader carries real weight. It's the person who holds the government to account, who speaks for the side that didn't win, who makes sure debate doesn't simply collapse into silence. When that position becomes contested, it's not just politics, it's a question about whether the rules everyone agreed to are being followed. What we know is that the challenge succeeded. Linton, who has been a central figure in Dominican politics for years, brought the case and the court found in his favor. Beyond the legal particulars, there's something steady about a country where a disagreement like this goes before a court rather than lingering unresolved. The Constitution gets to speak. People listen. And the system, even when it creaks, shows that it can still carry the weight it was built for. On a quiet evening in Roseau, that might not feel like drama, but it's the kind of thing that holds a country together, one ruling at a time. Vietnam's feed producers have been lowering their prices, and for a country where so much of daily life still runs on the rhythm of farms and water and weather, that quiet shift matters. When the cost of animal feed climbs too high, it presses hardest on the small producers, the families raising poultry or pigs on modest plots, watching margins thin with every bag they buy. So when the major feed companies decide to pull those prices down, it's not a dramatic headline. It's something gentler and maybe more useful, a little more room to breathe. Vietnam has been working through a stretch where input costs across agriculture have stayed stubbornly high, and farmers have felt it in the way you feel a long season that won't quite break. Feed is the backbone of that strain. It's the single biggest expense for most livestock households, and a reduction, even a modest one, can mean the difference between holding on and letting go. There's no grand ceremony in a price cut. No speeches, just a number moving in the right direction for the people who need it most. And across the provinces, in the early hours when the animals are fed and the day is just beginning, that small change settles into the work like relief settling into tired hands. If you're still with me, that's the note from Vietnam tonight. Not loud, not urgent, but steady and good. Togo is a narrow strip of a country, pressed between Ghana and Benin on the Gulf of Guinea, and these days much of its north is underwater. More than 26,000 people have been affected by severe flooding across the region, with homes damaged, farmland swamped, and families displaced from communities they know well. The Savannes region, which sits along Togo's northern border with Burkina Faso, has been hit especially hard. It is a dry part of the country in ordinary years, a place of open savanna and small farming towns, and so when the rains come with unusual force, the land is not always ready to hold them. People who had little to begin with have lost the little they had. The African Development Bank has approved a $1 million grant to help address the humanitarian emergency there, aimed at supporting displaced communities and the basic services they need to get through this. That money will go toward the things that matter most in the first weeks after a flood: shelter, clean water, food, and the slow work of helping people return. If you have never been to northern Togo, picture wide skies and reddish earth, mango trees near the compounds, and markets where women sell yams and millet under tarps. It is a quiet, resilient part of the world, and right now it is asking for help that has arrived, though not yet enough. The waters will recede, They always do. But the people of the Savannes region will be putting things back together long after the headlines have moved on. Jamaica has been quietly deepening its friendships across the ocean, and this week, one of those friendships took a more formal shape. The island nation and Ghana signed mutual agreements aimed at strengthening cooperation between them. Two countries separated by thousands of miles of Atlantic water, but bound by a history that runs deeper than any distance. The details of the agreements themselves are still settling into place, but the gesture is clear. Both nations seem interested in building something lasting, not just diplomatic handshakes, but practical ties that might reach into trade, culture, and the everyday lives of people on both sides. If you're still with me, consider what it means for a small Caribbean nation and a West African one to turn toward each other with intention. There's a long memory in that turning. Jamaica and Ghana share threads of ancestry, of language, of music carried across the sea in both directions over centuries. To formalize a relationship now is, in some quiet way, to honor those threads and to suggest they might hold weight in the future, not just the past. No grand declarations, no sweeping promises, just two countries signing papers and meaning it, choosing to cooperate rather than merely coexist. And somewhere between Kingston and Accra, that choice sits steady, unhurried, and worth carrying into the night. Thailand has been chosen to host the third WHO Global Summit on Traditional Medicine, set for 2027. It's a quiet but meaningful honor, the kind of recognition that doesn't make much noise, but says something about how a country is seen by the wider world. Traditional medicine here isn't a curiosity or a relic. It's part of everyday life, woven through how people care for themselves and their families. Herbal remedies, massage therapies, practices passed down through generations, these sit alongside modern hospitals and clinics, not in opposition to them but as companions. The World Health Organization has been working to bring traditional medicine into global health conversations more seriously, and Thailand has been part of that effort. The summits gather health ministers, practitioners, and researchers from across many countries to share knowledge and find common ground. For Thailand, hosting in 2027 is a chance to show what it has built: the institutions, the training, the respect for knowledge that predates modern pharmacology by centuries. If you've ever walked through a Thai market and noticed the small stalls selling dried herbs, or seen a shop where someone is being treated with traditional massage, you've glimpsed what this summit is really about. Not just medicine, but a way of understanding the body that has endured. And in a few years, people from all over the world will come to Thailand to listen, to learn, and to take some of that understanding home with them. Sri Lanka knows the rain well. It comes with the monsoon, and the land has learned to absorb it most of the time. But these rains have been heavier than the ground could hold. Floods spread across low-lying areas. Mudslides came down where the hillsides were already saturated. At least 7 people have lost their lives. Families displaced, homes damaged, the kind of disruption that takes weeks to fully measure. Authorities made the call to close schools, keeping children home where they could be watched over, keeping roads clear for emergency crews. It's the sort of decision that sounds simple but isn't. Every closed classroom means parents rearranging work, means meals that need to happen differently, means children sensing the worry in the adults around them. Sri Lanka has been through floods before. The country has systems for this, relief networks and disaster response teams that know their terrain. But each time, the rain finds new ways to test what's been built. If you're still with me, hold a thought for the families waiting for the water to recede, for the moment they can walk outside, look at what remains, and begin again. The monsoon will move on. It always does. And Sri Lanka will be there, doing what it has always done after the rain, cleaning, rebuilding, carrying on. Zambia is thinking about copper and ballots these days in the mining regions that anchor the country's economy. People who work the copper belt are watching the approach of national elections with a particular hope that whatever government comes next will stand behind the expansion of an industry that has long sustained this part of the world. Copper is not new here. It runs through the soil and the story of the place, through generations of livelihoods and the rhythms of towns built around the mines. What the miners are looking for now is straightforward, in the way that such things are ever straightforward: investment, stability, and policy that lets the work grow. There is a quiet weight to that hope. An election in any country is a moment when ordinary working people try to read the future. In Zambia's copper towns, that reading is done with the mineshaft behind them and the price of copper on global markets somewhere in the distance. Church leaders have been working across communities to keep the campaign season peaceful. And there are calls, too, for the government to keep the internet open and unrestricted through the voting so that information can move freely and people can speak. It is a familiar tension, the one between an economy that needs to expand and a political moment that asks everyone to choose carefully. Tonight, in the towns where the copper is pulled from the earth, that is the conversation, not loud, not urgent in the way of crisis, but steady and present, the way important things often are when they are close to home. And the night settles there, with the mines still turning and the vote still ahead. Norway has long been a country that lives with the sea, along that jagged coastline. In the long dark winters and the bright summers that follow, fishing and aquaculture have shaped not just the economy but the identity of the place. So when the United States moved to impose tariffs that singled out Norwegian seafood, the response from Oslo was firm and clear. Norway rebuked the measure, calling it unfair and unwarranted, and made clear it would defend an industry that employs whole communities along the coast. The details of the tariffs remain sparse, but the message from Norway's government was unmistakable. This isn't an abstract trade dispute for them. It's about cod and salmon, about the small towns where the processing plants sit at the water's edge, about generations of families who have worked the cold Atlantic. Norway has weathered trade frictions before, and it tends to approach them with a steady diplomatic hand, but there's a particular sting when the target is something so close to the national self-image. Seafood isn't just an export category in Norway. It's a story the country tells about itself. For now, the lines are drawn, the words have been exchanged, and the people who watch these things will be paying close attention to what comes next. If you're still with me, we'll let Norway sit with that for a moment, and then we'll move along. Syria has a new parliament these days, and if you listened closely to the streets in Damascus or the towns beyond, you'd hear something you might not expect. Not cynicism, but hope. That hope is fragile, and no one would pretend otherwise. The parliament itself holds limited power. It cannot reshape the country on its own, and the people who have been elected know that as well as anyone. But the expectations sitting on its shoulders are enormous. After years of war, displacement, and economic strain that touched nearly every family in the country, Syrians are looking for even small signs that ordinary life can be steered by ordinary people again. A new parliament, even one with constrained authority, is a structure, and in a place where so many structures were broken, a structure still standing can mean something. There is also the wider pressure Syria sits under. Its relationships with Russia, with China, with the United States are all shifting in ways that touch daily life: the price of fuel, the movement of goods, the question of who controls the oil fields in the northeast. The parliament cannot solve those things directly. But it can be a place where Syrians speak for themselves, where the country's direction is at least discussed rather than simply decided elsewhere. And so people are watching. Not with the kind of hope that expects miracles, but with the quieter kind, the kind that says perhaps something can begin here. If you're still with me, hold that thought. We'll carry it gently into the next stretch of night. China is in the middle of a quiet tension, the kind that doesn't make much noise but shapes millions of lives. The country built up its coal power plants as a support system, a backup meant to step in when wind and solar couldn't keep the lights on. That was the idea. But in practice, many of those plants are contracted to keep running, not just to wait. And when coal runs steadily, it leaves less room on the grid for the cleaner power growing alongside it. It's a bit like keeping a spare engine idling even after the main one's working fine. The emissions still rise. The clean energy still gets crowded out, a little more each season. This matters because China has also become the world's largest builder of solar and wind. Both things are true at once: the rapid green expansion and the coal that hasn't stepped back. Researchers tracking this say the support system designed to be temporary is becoming permanent, and that gap between intention and reality is where the challenge lives. If you're still with me, you might sit with that image for a moment: two kinds of power, sharing one grid, each pulling toward a different future. No single decision got things here, and no single one will sort them out. But the question of what gets to run, and what was only meant to help, is one China is sitting with now, and the answer will reach well beyond its borders. Bosnia and Herzegovina has opened its first residential solar scheme, a small but meaningful step for a country that has been slower than some of its neighbors to bring rooftop panels into ordinary homes. For a long time, solar energy here meant large installations, commercial arrays, things built at scale. What's different now is the word residential panels going up where people actually live, on the roofs of families who will use the power themselves. The details of the scheme are still emerging, but the shape of it is clear enough. Households given a pathway to generate their own electricity, to draw less from the grid, to keep a little more of their own light. In a country where energy infrastructure still carries the weight of a complicated past, that matters. It's not a revolution. Nobody is claiming it is, but it is a first, and firsts carry a particular kind of quiet significance. The moment something moves from idea to practice, from policy to rooftop. If you think about the winters in this part of the Balkans, the long gray months when the sun sits low and the heating bills climb, you can sense why people might welcome a bit more control over their own power. And if you think about the summers, the long, bright afternoons stretching over the hills outside Sarajevo and Mostar, you can sense the resource that's been there all along, waiting to be caught. A first residential scheme. A few rooftops, a beginning modest and real, settled into the evening. São Tomé and Príncipe sits off the western coast of Central Africa, two volcanic islands in the Gulf of Guinea that most of the world has simply never visited. Fewer than 250,000 people live there. The land is thick with rainforest. The beaches are empty and the old Portuguese colonial architecture fades gently into the green. People have started calling it Africa's hidden eco-paradise, and it's not hard to see why. The forests hold species found nowhere else. The sea turtles come ashore to nest on dark sand. There are no high-rises, no resorts stretching for miles. What there is, instead, is a kind of quiet that has become rare. These days, the country is finding itself drawn into conversations it hasn't had before. It's begun offering a golden passport, a path to citizenship for around $90,000, joining a handful of small nations that trade a second nationality for investment. It's a practical thing for a small economy, a way to bring in revenue without cutting down forest or paving over coastline. Whether it changes the character of these islands is a question only time will answer. For now, São Tomé and Príncipe remains what it has been, a place where the clouds sit low on the volcanoes, where the cocoa plantations still carry the scent of chocolate on the air, and where the pace of life is set by the ocean rather than any clock. If you're still with me, picture that for a moment and let it stay with you as we move on. St. Kitts and Nevis is a small two-island nation in the Eastern Caribbean, and for some years now it has offered something that larger countries rarely do, a passport in exchange for investment. These citizenship by investment programs have brought in revenue, helped fund public projects, and given the islands a certain kind of leverage in a world where mobility is often tied to wealth. But the European Union has told St. Kitts and Nevis, along with 4 other Caribbean nations, that these programs must end by 2028. The concern from the EU's side is about security and oversight, how citizenship is granted and to whom. For the islands, it's a more complicated picture. The income from these programs has mattered, not as a luxury, but as part of how a small economy stays steady when fuel costs rise and shipping routes get more expensive. And those pressures are real here. The government has been working to cushion the blow of exactly those kinds of costs in recent months. So the deadline lands with weight. There's time, still, a few years to adjust, to find other ways to stand on firm ground. But for a place with limited land and a population that could fit in a single stadium, every shift in the rules of the global economy is felt close to the bone. What happens after 2028 isn't yet clear. For now, the islands are watching the calendar, and the world that made this arrangement possible is quietly changing around them. Lithuania sits on the eastern edge of NATO, and these days that edge feels close. The war in Ukraine has pressed the country to think carefully about what it would mean to receive the wounded, or to absorb a surge of patients if conflict ever spilled nearer. So Lithuania has been preparing its health system, strengthening capacity, thinking through logistics that no one wishes to need. It is the kind of work that happens quietly, in hospital corridors and government offices, far from the headlines. The country shares a border with Belarus, and along that frontier, border guards have been finding things underground. In the space of 2 weeks, 3 cross-border smuggling tunnels were discovered, dug from the Belarusian side, each one a small passage, but a reminder that this border is watched and tested. Meanwhile, NATO's presence in Lithuania continues its steady rhythm. Romanian airmen recently concluded an air policing mission there, part of the rotating presence that keeps Allied eyes on Baltic skies. American soldiers have been training with Lithuania's Riflemen's Union, a volunteer defense force rooted in a tradition older than the country's modern independence. None of this is panic. It is preparation, carried out with the calm of a nation that knows its geography and refuses to be surprised by it. And somewhere in the middle of all this, a young midfielder named Tomas Gudaitis is drawing attention from European football clubs, a reminder that life in Lithuania is not only about vigilance. There is talent rising, and games still being played. If you're still with me, hold that thought, and we'll move on. Malaysia has made a quiet promise, and it's one that matters to more than 100,000 people living within its borders. The government says it will not send Rohingya refugees back to Myanmar if their lives would be at risk there. It's a stance rooted in a simple recognition that return, however much it might be hoped for, cannot mean sending people into danger. Malaysia is not a signatory to the International Refugee Convention, which makes this assurance all the more significant. For years, Rohingya communities have sheltered in cities and towns across the country, living in the gaps between formal protection and informal belonging. The question of going home has always hovered, uncertain and heavy. Myanmar's situation remains unstable, and for many families, the idea of return is inseparable from fear. Malaysia's position, as expressed in recent days, acknowledges that reality without pretending to resolve it. There is no grand plan here, no sweeping solution, just a line drawn gently but firmly that says safety comes first. For the refugees listening for any signal about their future, that line may offer something scarce, a moment of steadiness in a long and unsettled wait, and for Malaysia, it's a reminder that compassion sometimes speaks loudest in the things a country declines to do. If you're still with me, we'll move on soon. But for now, let that sit, a small assurance carried into the night. United States has spent much of the last century learning a difficult lesson in places far from home. A headline this week from Foreign Policy asks it plainly: why does the United States keep losing wars? It is the kind of question that sounds simple until you sit with it. The article itself is behind a wall, so the details stay where they are. But the question alone is worth holding for a moment. America has built the most powerful military the world has ever seen, and yet in conflict after conflict, drawn out over years, sometimes decades, the ending rarely matches the beginning. Victory, whatever that word means now, tends to slip away. Scholars and soldiers and ordinary citizens have offered their reasons. Some point to the gap between what a military can destroy and what it can build. Some talk about patience and how hard it is for a democracy to sustain a war its people no longer understand. Others say the problem is older, rooted in the tendency of powerful nations to mistake force for understanding. If you're still with me, you know this is not a new conversation. It is the kind a country returns to quietly, in the spaces between the louder arguments. There are families who have sent generation after generation into these wars, and they carry the weight of every answer that never quite arrived. Tonight, we can simply let the question stand, not as a judgment, but as something honest a nation is still trying to name. Poland has been making its voice heard in Europe's long conversation about migration, asking the European Union to deny residence to people who enter the bloc without authorization. It's a position that puts Warsaw at the sharper edge of a debate that has never fully settled since the migration crises of the last decade. The argument is about borders, but also about what Europe owes and to whom, and where the line between law and compassion should fall. Poland itself sits on the EU's eastern edge, and for years that geography has shaped how it sees the question. The government's call would mean that those who cross without permission would not be granted the right to stay, a stance that some neighbors find too hard and others quietly understand. It's the kind of story that doesn't resolve easily, because it touches on sovereignty and fear and the lives of people in motion all at once. If you're still with me, you might feel how these debates echo differently depending on where you stand on the map. For Poland, standing on that eastern frontier, the answer feels clear even as the wider Europe continues to search for one together. Benin has brought a new Senate into being after years without an upper chamber in its legislature. The country has inaugurated a body tasked with reviewing laws, guarding the Constitution, and holding politicians to account when they stray. It is the kind of institution that works quietly. It does not make the noise a lower house makes, but it sits behind the noise, weighing what has been proposed and asking whether it holds together. The senators will look at legislation before it becomes final. They will watch the Constitution. And they will have a hand in discipline, which is a delicate word in any political system because it can mean order or it can mean control, depending on who wields it and how. Not everyone in Benin is persuaded that this new Senate carries the legitimacy it needs. There have been questions, the kind of questions that follow any new institution in a young democracy. People wonder who the senators truly answer to, and whether the chamber will represent the breadth of the country or merely consolidate what already holds power. These are fair concerns, and they belong to a society that takes its constitution seriously enough to argue over it. A Senate is a slow thing by design. It does not have to prove itself in a week or a month. It proves itself over years, in the quality of its review, in the independence it shows when it matters, in the trust it earns from people who started out skeptical. Benin has built the room. Now the work of filling it with meaning begins. Somalia sits at one of the most important stretches of water on Earth, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The narrow passage between the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula is where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden. Ships carrying an enormous share of the world's trade pass through these waters. And now, Somalia has entered into a defense pact with Pakistan, a partnership that, according to reporting from Defense Security Asia, is reshaping the security picture across the Horn of Africa. The details of the agreement are still emerging, but the geography tells you most of what you need to understand. When two nations formalize a military relationship along a corridor this vital, it sends ripples well beyond their own borders. Ethiopia watches, so does every country with cargo moving through those waters. Somalia has spent years working to rebuild its national institutions from within, often with help from outside partners. This pact with Pakistan represents something different, a bilateral security relationship chosen on its own terms, between two countries that each brings something the other needs. For Somalia, it is another step in the slow, difficult work of standing up as a sovereign state in a neighborhood where sovereignty is hard-won. For Pakistan, it is a foothold near one of the world's great maritime choke points. If you're still with me, just hold that image for a moment, a narrow strait, busy with ships, and on one shore of it, a country quietly adding to the alliances that shape its future. Mauritius is an island that carries many histories, and some of the quietest ones are only now being carefully gathered before they fade. Among them is the story of indentureship, the system that, after slavery's abolition, brought hundreds of thousands of laborers from India and elsewhere to work the sugar plantations of Mauritius and other colonies. It was a vast movement of people across oceans, and each arrival carried a personal story that often went unrecorded. Now, a researcher named Mahase has been working to preserve those stories, not the broad statistics which historians have long held, but the small human details behind them. What did people carry with them? What did they leave behind? How did they rebuild a life on an island far from where they began? The work is slow and patient. It involves sitting with descendants, reading faded documents, listening for the threads that connect a family in Mauritius to a village they may never have seen. It is, in a way, the kind of work that happens best in the evening hours, when people are willing to remember. Mauritius today is a place where those histories live side by side. Creole, French, Indian, Chinese, African, woven into the texture of everyday life. But the texture only stays rich if someone keeps tending it. Mahase's journey is a reminder that the most important stories aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the ones a grandmother half tells, and a grandchild decides to write down. And so the remembering goes on, gently on an island in the Indian Ocean. Uruguay sits quietly on the eastern bank of the River Plate, a small country between two giants, often overlooked on the map, but this week it found itself named in a journey that will draw the world's attention south. Pope Leo XIV will visit Uruguay in November, part of a 12-day trip across South America that will also take him to Argentina and Peru. It will be his first visit to Latin America as pontiff. The Vatican confirmed the schedule, and the church in Uruguay has already begun to speak about what the visit might mean, not in political terms, but in the language of faith and hope. For a country of about 3.5 million people, where Catholicism has long been part of the cultural fabric, though practiced more quietly than in some of its neighbors, a papal visit carries a particular weight. It is a recognition, a turning of eyes toward a place that does not always command them. November in Uruguay means late spring. The days are lengthening. The jacarandas will be in bloom in Montevideo, and somewhere between the old colonial streets of Colonia and the broad avenues of the capital, preparations will quietly begin. The details of the visit, the cities, the ceremonies, the meetings will come into focus in the weeks ahead. But for now, the news itself is enough. A journey planned, a door opening. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A small country waiting to welcome a visitor from very far away and finding in that waiting something like hope. Ivory Coast has taken control of the Espoir oil field, along with its floating production vessel, the vessel that sits above the water and processes the crude as it rises from beneath the seabed. It's a shift that matters in a country where offshore energy has become a quiet engine of growth. The Espoir field sits off the coast near Abidjan, and for years it's been part of the architecture of the national economy. Not the most visible story, but a steady one. Taking direct control of both the field and the production platform means more of the operation now answers to Ivorian hands. It's the kind of news that doesn't make much noise in the wider world, but it carries real weight where it matters. In national budgets, in jobs, in the slow work of deciding what belongs to whom along the West African coast. There are no dramatic turns in this story, no sudden crisis. Just a country bringing a piece of its own energy infrastructure closer to home and settling into the responsibility that comes with it. If you're still with me, you might picture the vessel out there on the dark water, the lights on its deck, the hum of machinery processing oil that has waited a very long time beneath the sea. It's a small but significant handover, the kind that changes things quietly in the way that matters most to the people who live with the consequences. And so the Espoir field enters its next chapter, under a flag it has always known, now more fully its own. Yemen has a stretch of coastline along the Red Sea that most of the year feels like a place the world has passed by. But there's a yearly mild weather spell that brings it back to life. The details are sparse, just a headline's worth of news, but the image it carries is enough. Temperatures ease, the air along the shore softens. And for a while, the coast becomes livable in a way it hasn't been for months. This is a country that has spent years in the margins of other people's headlines. Airstrikes, shipping lanes, tankers, foreign navies, the stories that reach the rest of us are almost always about the sea, or about conflict, or about what Yemen means to someone else's economy or security. So there's something quiet and stubborn in the idea that the coast itself has a season. That the weather turns and people step outside and the shoreline remembers what it's like to be inhabited without urgency. We don't know much more than that. No names, no specific towns, no pictures to hold on to. But sometimes a headline is enough to remind us that a place is not only its crises. Yemen's coast is not only a shipping lane or a theater of war. It's a shore where people live, and where once a year the heat relents and the air moves and the land feels like it's breathing again. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. The coast, the mild air, the ordinary turning of a season. Kazakhstan has been named the leading country in Central Asia in the 2026 Legatum Prosperity Index, a ranking that measures not just wealth, but the quieter things that hold a society together. The Legatum Index looks at a wide range of pillars: health, education, governance, personal freedom, safety, the natural environment. It asks whether life is getting more livable, not just whether an economy is getting larger. And in the company of its neighbors across Central Asia, Kazakhstan has moved to the front. We don't have the detailed breakdown yet, the full report hasn't reached us, but the headline alone tells you something worth sitting with. Prosperity measured this way is a patient kind of accounting. It doesn't reward noise or spectacle, it rewards the slow accumulation of decent conditions, schools that function, roads that hold, institutions people can trust without thinking about them too much. For a country that has spent the years since independence building much of its national framework from the ground up, that kind of recognition is not a finish line, it's a marker on a long road. If you're still with me, consider what it means for a nation to be measured this way and to come out ahead of its region. Not the loudest story. Not the one that grabs you by the collar, but the kind of story that matters most to the people living inside it. The ones who go to work, raise children, and step outside each morning wondering whether the air is clean and the future is steady. Tonight, that quiet progress is what we carry from Kazakhstan. Denmark has been quietly working towards something, and one recent Saturday, it arrived. For the first time, biogas alone covered the entire country's gas use for a full day, not part of it, all of it. That means every furnace, every stove, every industrial burner that drew on the gas network was fed by renewable fuel, captured from farms, from waste, from the slow chemistry of things breaking down. It's the kind of milestone that doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It just shows up in the numbers, and then someone notices and says, wait, look what happened. Denmark has been building toward this for years, converting agricultural waste into energy, turning what was once a problem into a resource. The country's farmers have been part of it, and so have its engineers, and so has the simple fact that Denmark is a place where people think in long horizons. A single Saturday doesn't solve everything, and nobody in Copenhagen is claiming it does. Fossil gas still flows on other days, and the transition ahead is long. But there's something worth holding on to in a moment like this. A whole country, for one day, running on what the land and the livestock and the leftovers could provide. If you're still with me, just sit with that for a moment. A Saturday like any other, except that underneath it, the energy had changed. Denmark will keep going, of course. There will be harder days and more complicated ones, but this one was different, and it's worth carrying into the night. The United Arab Emirates has quietly opened a new chapter in its relationship with the United States. The two countries have launched their first joint military artificial intelligence task force, a small but deliberate step, the kind that signals where a government sees the future heading. Beyond the headline, details are scarce. We know it exists, that it is a first, and that it brings together two countries that have long maintained a close but sometimes complicated partnership. What the task force will actually do, how it will be staffed, what problems it will work on, those things remain to be seen. But the fact of it tells you something about the Emirates and about this moment. The UAE sits at one of the most sensitive crossroads in the world. The Strait of Hormuz, just a short distance from its coast, carries a vast share of the world's oil and has seen more than its share of tension. These days, talk of deals and ceasefires fills the air, and the waterway's future feels unsettled. Into that uncertainty, the Emirates is building new bridges, not just in energy or trade, but in technology, in the quiet architecture of how modern security is done. Artificial intelligence is still a young field, full of promise and unanswered questions. And here is a country choosing to learn it alongside a partner, rather than alone. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. 2 flags, 1 table, and a conversation that is only just beginning. Bhutan sits between two of the largest countries on Earth, China and India, and has spent its whole modern life learning how to stay itself. It's a small kingdom in the eastern Himalayas, fewer than 1 million people, most of them Buddhist, living in valleys that open slowly as you climb. And lately, observers have been noticing something interesting about how Bhutan moves through the world. There's a phrase for it, Buddhist diplomacy. The idea is simple enough. Bhutan doesn't project power the way large states do. It doesn't have the size for that, and it doesn't seem to want it. Instead, it leans on something older, shared faith, cultural ties, a certain way of being patient. Buddhist tradition reaches across borders in this part of the world, connecting Bhutan to neighbors like Thailand, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, and beyond. And Bhutan seems to use that connection not as a weapon, but as a bridge. It hosts, it listens, it shows up. There's something quietly remarkable about that. In a region where tensions run high and every relationship carries weight, Bhutan chooses presence over pressure. You can see it in the way it handles its friendships, carefully, without spectacle, with a kind of calm that feels almost deliberate. As if the kingdom has decided that its smallness is not a weakness but a discipline. And maybe that's the whole point. Not every nation needs to shout to be heard. Some just need to keep showing up, steadily, the way a bell keeps ringing after you've struck it. Iceland has always lived with fire beneath its feet. It sits on a seam where tectonic plates pull apart, and the land remembers it, in the basalt cliffs, in the hot springs, in the eruptions that come without asking permission. Lately, though, the people who study this place are watching two things at once: the volcanoes, restless as ever, and the slower, quieter change creeping across the glaciers and the coastline. Climate change doesn't arrive the way magma does. It arrives in inches of melt, in species shifting north, in winters that feel just a little less like the ones the oldest residents describe. There's been a film making the rounds this year, an obituary for a glacier that no longer exists. That's the kind of language Icelanders understand. Not a warning shouted, but a farewell spoken plainly. The Arctic Institute has been keeping an eye on how these two forces, volcanic and climatic, sit side by side. One is ancient and familiar. The other is familiar too, now, but newer and harder to predict. And yet the country carries on. People still walk the highland routes, still farm the low pastures, still look up at the northern sky and wonder what the light will do next. If you're still with me, picture a small country that has decided not to look away from what's changing and not to panic either, just to keep watching carefully the way you watch something you love. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.